Last Exit to Brooklyn is a 1964 novel by Hubert Selby Jr., which was adapted into a 1989 film by German director Uli Edel. So I can't really call this an adaptation showdown because there was, as of now, only one real movie version of this book, so I'm just going to call this book versus movie or whatever. We're comparing the movie by Uli Edel to the book by Hubert Selby Jr. One of the things that made me want to read this book is that it's very influential, especially in the world of music. A lot of artists that I'm a big fan of were heavily inspired by this book. One of my favorite musicians, Mark Knopfler, actually did the film's soundtrack. So I've heard of this movie for a long time, but I've never actually seen it until now. David Bowie said Last Exit to Brooklyn was a huge influence on him. The Smiths' first album, The Queen is Dead, was named after one of the chapters in this book. Before Sting was in The Police, he was in a band called Last Exit, named after the book, obviously. Henry Rollins from Black Flag and other things became a huge fan of Hubert Selby Jr. and helped rediscover and repopularize his work.
I'm not saying you're illiterate, but I'm saying you're missing out if you don't check out a little Hubert Selby. Why should I bother even buying a pen? Because this guy has written everything that needs to be written.
Even The Simpsons had an episode called Last Exit to Springfield, which involved a workers' strike at the power plant and shared similarities with the plot of the strike chapter in this book and had Homer playing the role of Harry Black.
Smithers, I'm beginning to think that Homer Simpson was not the brilliant tactician I thought he was.
Reading Last Exit to Brooklyn for the first time, it feels like being punched in the face repeatedly, but in an endearing, poetic kind of way. It's almost like the literary equivalent of listening to this album for the first time, which is also appropriate because Hubert Selby Jr. was a big influence on Lou Reed and his early beat poetry style lyrics.
There's this section in Last Exit to Brooklyn where everything's capitalized because everybody's screaming. And I just thought, this jumps off the page, it's so fantastic.
The two most obvious Lou Reed and Velvet Underground songs that were influenced by Last Exit to Brooklyn were Street Hassle and Sister Ray. In fact, on one of the live versions of Street Hassle, Lou Reed actually name drops his influence.
Something that could have been written by William Burroughs, Hubert Selby, John Rishi.
I don't think I've ever read a book with such a unique writing style like this before. This whole book is written in a real colloquial everyman style that really makes you feel like you're sitting at some bar in Brooklyn in the 1950s, overhearing two vulgar Brooklynites curse and rant about some story they heard secondhand. It feels like a lot of gossip or something. The author purposefully disregarded the conventional rules of writing, stuff like paragraphs, quotation marks, question marks, apostrophes, proper use of the Queen's English, that kind of stuff. The author would often make up his own writing style as he went. For example, a word like aisle would be spelled I/LL instead of I''LL. Each chapter has its own distinct writing style and feel that really sets them apart and makes them distinct from one another. For example, the story Tralala in the book, that whole chapter, is written in one giant unbroken block of text. This was a challenging read at times because it was just so different, but that doesn't mean it was bad. Once you get into the groove of it, to get into the flow of these stories, you really didn't notice after a while. The biggest difference between the film and the book is structural. This book is divided into 6 sections, or chapters, or stories, whatever you want to call them. The movie is not broken up into different chapters. Instead, it takes elements from most of the chapters and weaves them into one overall narrative. Considering that, this does make doing straight A-B comparisons to the book and the movie a little challenging, because both had their own take on the story, but we're going to have some fun anyway. They all take place within the same universe, the same time period, the same location, but they can basically be read in any order. Each of these 6 chapters is not very plot-heavy or plot-driven. They're just meant to give you a little snapshot of the characters' lives and what they're feeling and thinking and experiencing in a certain period of time, a little day in the life, if you will. One of the biggest structural differences is that the movie does not include the final chapter of the book called Land's End at all, so the film is really an adaptation of 5 out of the 6 of the book's stories. The book's extremely Brooklyn American feel to it is in contrast with the movie's German director and his multinational production team. The movie had much more of a European art house feel to it, which emphasized mood and atmosphere over action and plot. The movie begins with symbolism of a large gate. At the beginning of the movie, the gate is closed, which is supposed to symbolize the characters are all trapped or locked into their situations in life. And at the end of the movie, the gate is shown to be open, and people are walking through it, which means that, after the plot happened, life moves on. It's supposed to give a bit of hope at the end of it. In the book, barely any of the characters, except maybe the young couple getting married and having the kid in the And Baby Makes 3 chapter, almost none of the main characters are even remotely likable or have any redeeming qualities. Now, I guess when the director was interpreting this for a movie, that obviously doesn't work so well for a movie, so he did make these characters slightly more likable. Maybe not completely likable, but they had some humanity in them. Now let's go chapter by chapter, story by story, and see how the book compares to the film. The opening chapter of this book is about a group of 1950s street gang hoodlum types who hang around that central location I mentioned called the Greek Diner. One night, one of the hoodlums named Freddie is being violent towards a prostitute named Rosie, and then some of the sailors who are stationed at the Brooklyn Navy Yard try to step in and intervene, but one of them gets the absolute crap beat out of him. Yeah, that's the story, first part. It's very deep. So this first chapter of the book I felt was adapted the most accurately in the movie. It's not the longest chapter in the book, it's fairly short, it's only like 10 or so pages, but when I was watching the movie, it was cool because I felt like I was watching what was playing in my head as I was reading the book, and that's always a cool feeling. The Queen is Dead is the story of a sassy transgender woman named Georgette who falls in love with this guy named Vinny, and Vinny constantly teases and rejects Georgette over and over.
I think the love of your life just walked in, sat at the counter.
Why, Vincent! What a surprise!
One night, Vinny and his gang are messing with Georgette by playing monkey in the middle with her and a knife. And of course, the knife stabs Georgette in the leg. Then Vinny's gang drops off an injured Georgette back at her home. Georgette can't stand being home taking the abuse for much longer, so she leaves to be with her friends. And then her and her friends decide to throw a party and invite Vinny and his crew. When the party's over, Georgette thinks she has seduced and slept with Vinny, her lifelong goal, it seems. But it was actually one of his friends. So naturally she's pretty upset and walks out into the cold night, and it's heavily suggested that she dies of some overdose. That's how it happened in the book. Well, let's talk about the movie. So the movie version of Georgette's story was also pretty accurate to the book's version. One of the biggest differences, though, is the ending. Like I said, in the book, it's heavily implied that she walks out into the cold night depressed and she's high on drugs or whatever, and she just kind of dies of an overdose in the cold and just kind of fades away. It was like a musical fade out, but in a book. However, the movie version of Georgette's story ends with her in the same situation. She's upset, she walks out into the cold night, but then she just gets hit by a car. And an interesting bit of trivia is that the guy who was driving the car who hit Georgette was the book's author, Hubert Selby Jr. So the book version of And Baby Makes 3 is about a young couple, Susie and Tommy, who have a child outside of their marriage. Then they get married and they have a christening party for the baby. And while that party's going on, Tommy goes outside and gets on his motorcycle and runs off with another woman named Roberta. Now, comparing this to the movie, the biggest difference is that in the book, this was a relatively short chapter, but in the movie, And Baby Makes 3 was extended throughout the plot of the movie and meant to be one of the major subplots. The father of the bride and baby's grandfather in the story wasn't really much of a character at all in the book. In fact, I can't even remember if he had a name. However, in the movie, this unnamed character was turned into one of the major characters named Big Joe. The book is very hopeless and grim and dark, but the movie has little bits of hope and comic relief, and I think this story in the movie is one of the best examples of that because the family are written as these real stereotypical Brooklynites, always yelling at each other, that usual stuff.
You can't have a baby yet, and it's too soon. She ain't even married yet.
The Tralala story is one about a prostitute named Tralala who runs a scheme where she lures her clients to remote locations and then knocks them unconscious and robs them. Eventually, she meets a military officer who treats her very nicely and buys her lots of expensive gifts.
I got me an officer in Manhattan. Takes me out places, he buys me things.
When the military guy leaves her because of his work, she has a hard time getting back to her usual prostitution and robbery scheme, so she does what any of us would do and she goes on a self-destructive binge of alcohol and drugs until, well, I can't really say on YouTube what happens, but let's just say a lot of not nice stuff happens to her and it's unclear whether she's dead or left for dead. So let's take a look at the differences. In the book, the main character, Tralala, was shown to be coarse, violent, completely amoral, and really just as bad as the pimps she was working with. In the last scene of the movie, Tralala is thinking of the love letter written to her by that sailor guy who really liked her. Whereas in the book, at the end of her story, she didn't seem to be that emotionally affected by the love letter and was in fact more annoyed that there was a letter in the envelope instead of money, which she was expecting, which really just goes to show how morally bankrupt her character was in the book. And like I said, in the movie, they gave her a bit of a happier ending. Just a bit. In the movie, at the end of her story, she's not dead, and she's shown that maybe she can have hope for redemption because that one sailor dude who dated her for a little bit and kind of fell in love with her, that little bit of real love changed her. You know, it like grew the Grinch's heart 3 times that day, and maybe there's redemption for her down the road. At over 100 pages, Strike is the longest chapter, longest story of the book. It is the most plot-driven of any of these stories, and it feels like its own mini-movie in a way. The main character is a guy named Harry Black. At home, he's a physically and verbally abusive husband, a crappy absent father, and a self-loathing closeted homosexual. At his job, he's also way too enthusiastic about his workplace union and their rules and regulations. One day, Harry takes a relatively small issue and blows it up to the point where he initiates a factory-wide worker strike, and then he's put in charge of the local union office.
Harry, I need a new set of picket signs down here by 8 o'clock tomorrow.
Don't worry about it, boys. I'll take care of it.
Why is he so involved in the strike and the union regulations at his job? It's because he's a lowlife and he really hates himself and doesn't think much of himself, and just enforcing these tiny-ass stupid rules at his job is like the only thing that makes him feel important in life.
That's teaching people not to fuck with Harry Black.
In the book, we have lines like, Harry felt important probably for the first time in his unremarkable life. The bosses can't stand Harry and want to get him fired, but Harry wants to keep the strike going for as long as possible. And this is for a number of reasons. One being that he doesn't actually have to go to work while the strike is going on. Another is that while not working, he can charge a bunch of random nonsense and crap to the union's account. Many things like kegs of beer, alcohol, a radio, and other stuff to keep the other strikers and people he's just hanging around with all day satiated. Another main reason, like I mentioned, is that being the leader of the strike is one of the only times in Harry's life so far that he has felt even the least bit important.
You stay back there where you belong!
Another reason that Harry wants to keep the strike going for as long as humanly possible is that Harry has a relationship with a transgender woman named Regina.
My, aren't we looking handsome tonight?
And everything's going fine in Harry's world. His little scheme, being away from home, being a big shot at the union office, his secret love affair, everything's going fine for him until, of course, eventually the strike has to come to an end.
Now you think I'm gonna take the heat because you fucked up?
Hold on, boys. For Christ's sake, what about my hand, huh?
Nah, that's it. We can't let you run the office anymore.
And when it comes to an end, it means he can't just charge random stuff he wants to the union's account.
Champagne from Bernie's Liquors, cab rides all over hell, a new tie? Who the fuck do you think you are, Frank Sinatra?
He has to, save money and stop buying lots of stuff for Regina.
You can take me to this adorable little new place that has the most divine champagne brunch.
Regina, I don't have enough money.
What do you mean you don't have enough money? Go get some.
And, well, it turns out that Regina's a bit of a gold digger, and as soon as he stops spending money on her, she doesn't give a crap about him anymore.
If you have money, you can meet me later at Stewart's. And if not, please do not annoy me any further.
But we don't have to go.
So the strike is over, he has to go back to work, and his secret love affair is done, and which means Harry starts to feel depressed, desperate, rejected. Like Tralala, he goes on this really self-destructive downward spiral and does some stuff that, again, I cannot and don't want to talk about on YouTube here. Let's just say it also doesn't end happily for him. While Harry is doing these not good things, a group of local hoodlums finds him and beats the living hell out of him, and then the story ends. The low-life, unlikable, and detestable aspects of Harry Black's character were very clearly shown in the book, but not so much in the movie, or at least nowhere nearly as it is done in the book. So the book version of Harry Black, he's shown to be verbally and physically abusive to his wife, but however the movie version, he just kind of ignores her the entire time. In the book, Harry doesn't personally participate in the fights between the striking workers and the police. He kind of acts like a weasel and influences everyone from the sidelines and stays out of the way. The movie version of Harry actually does, however, personally get involved in the strike-related fights.
Those sons of bitches are coming out!
In both the book and the movie, Harry's story ends with him getting severely beaten. In the movie, they go an extra step and get visually creative, having Harry get hung up on the back of this billboard after his beating, which kind of makes him look like Christ on the cross, which is a really weird treatment for Harry Black if you know what he just previously did that caused his beating. I don't know if I would be comparing him to Jesus at that moment. In the book, the workers' strike is the main subject of the longest story of the book, and we get a good deal of development about how the strike started, all the people involved, what the bosses thought of Harry, etc. In the movie, the strike is definitely important, but the nature and details of it aren't necessarily as fleshed out as they are in the book. We never really get a sense of what issues are at stake and why exactly they're resolved in the movie like we do in the book. So now that we talked about some general differences and went chapter by chapter of the book and the movie comparisons, let's just talk about some fun, random thoughts I had throughout this process. This movie has a large ensemble cast of characters, and a lot of these actors I know from other places. For example, all you Sopranos fans, hey look, it's Johnny Cakes. And hey look, it's Bobby Bacala's dad. And Phil Leotardo even makes an appearance.
The Almighty God, Father of our Lord Jesus Christ.
I did 20 fucking years.
And Tralala is played by the same actress who, in The Hateful Eight, was playing that 145-year-old priceless Martin guitar when Kurt Russell snatched it out of her hands and smashed it.
Music time's over.
Hey look, it's Barney Rubble from Viva Rock Vegas. So an interesting thing about the book is that most of the story takes place around the Brooklyn Army Terminal. However, most of the movie was filmed in and around Red Hook, Brooklyn, which is not the Brooklyn Army Terminal, but they're both in Brooklyn and they're really not that far apart, so the difference is like, doesn't matter. Believe it or not, the movie's director had a very religious upbringing, and you may be asking yourself, why did a man with a religious upbringing want to direct a movie based on a book of such depravity? I read that he saw the book as a series of timeless human stories, kind of like the Bible's Old Testament parables that he was raised on when he was a kid. The weirdly religious undertone of the story is further shown in the book when every chapter begins with some quote from the Bible. By contrast, in the movie, it only has one Bible quote right at the beginning of the movie, which is taken from the Tralala chapter, and it's only half of what's there. So that concludes my book-to-movie comparisons of Last Exit to Brooklyn. So, was it good? Yes, it was original. It scores points for originality and influential status. Overall, I liked the story. I found the characters interesting, thought it was edgy, thought it was gritty, especially for the time it was written in 1964. Is it for everyone? No. I cannot recommend this to everyone. I can picture a lot of people being turned off by the contents of the book and the visuals in the movie. Now the question is, which did I enjoy more, the movie or the book? Obviously, always the book probably has more fleshed out characters, more of a fleshed out plot. You get more details of people's backgrounds or motivation just because you have, what is this, like 300 something pages, and the movie can only be like 2 hours plus or minus, you know? However, I think the movie was more easy to consume, to watch, to experience, you know, because you can hit play and it just goes. The book, you have to sit there and read it, and like I mentioned earlier in this video, a lot of Hubert Selby's writing, if you're not already familiar with it, is a challenging read. It's like putting on a freeform jazz like Ornette Coleman album or something.
Freeform jazz.
It's hard to say what's better, the book or the movie. Both were good. Both took their own take on the story. So if you like gritty things, edgy things, dark, hopeless, bleak, meaningless things with just little sprinkles of hope and humanity in them, then I can recommend the book and the story. If you're a fan of Mark Knopfler, I'd say the soundtrack is very good. And if you're a fan of Lou Reed's writing and music in general, then this is definitely worth checking out because Hubert Selby was a huge influence on Lou Reed's lyrics and just the subject matter of his songs. Well, that is all for my Last Exit to Brooklyn book-to-movie comparisons. If you made it this far, thank you. I appreciate it very much, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.